I never thought it would happen to me. As a 40-year-old self-made tech entrepreneur in California, my life was a meticulously orchestrated symphony of calculated risks that had all, against incredible odds, paid off spectacularly. My net worth, a figure that felt both profoundly abstract and astonishingly heavy, hovered somewhere around $48 million. I had built my digital empire from the cramped confines of a college dorm room, a venture fueled by gallons of cheap, lukewarm coffee and an unshakable, almost religious belief in the elegance of my own code. I understood the complex dance of algorithms, the fickle tides of market trends, and the predatory waltz of venture capital. The one thing I had never managed to decrypt, the one system I could not crack, was people. After my app, a sleek productivity tool that organized chaos, was acquired by a major tech firm in a deal that made headlines, I found myself adrift in a new, bewildering world. It was a world of performative wealth, of transactional relationships, and of smiles that never quite reached the eyes. I was a formidable shark in the cutthroat world of business, but I felt like a lost, bumbling minnow in the glittering, shallow waters of Lowe's Angels Society. That is where I met her. Her name was Lena, and she was, without exaggeration, a living work of art. Our paths crossed at a ludicrously opulent luxury car launch event held in a cavernous private hangar at the Santa Monica airport. The air inside was thick and cloying, a mixture of expensive perfume, desperation, and the faint smell of jet fuel. I was standing awkwardly beside a sports car that cost more than my first house, feeling like a complete and utter imposter in my own life, when she materialized beside me. She was 32, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to bypass my carefully constructed defenses and see the profound loneliness hiding behind my success. She was impossibly charming, effortlessly flirty, and she laughed at my clumsy, nervous jokes with a warmth that felt utterly genuine. She made me feel seen, not just for the staggering number in my bank account, but for the man I desperately wanted to be. I knew she was aware of my financial status. I was not naive enough to believe otherwise. The news of the acquisition had been splashed across every tech journal and business publication for months, but with Lena, I allowed myself to believe she was different. I wanted it to be true with such a ferocious intensity that I think I willed it into existence, building a fantasy around her that I desperately needed. Our courtship was a dizzying, cinematic whirlwind, a blur of sunset drives down the winding ribbon of the Pacific Coast Highway, of intimate dinners at exclusive restaurants where the reservations themselves were a status symbol, and of long, soul-bearing conversations in my cavernous Malibu beach house, the rhythmic crashing of the waves outside a constant, soothing soundtrack. She was not just beautiful, she was whip-smart, asking insightful, probing questions about my work, my ambitions, and my dreams. She seemed to cherish the story of my struggle, the years of ramen noodles and sleepless nights, more than she did the glittering fruits of my success. 10 months felt like a lifetime, a compressed eternity of joy. I proposed to her on a spontaneous trip to Lake Como, Italy, on a private balcony overlooking the serene, moonlit water. She said yes, her luminous eyes shimmering with what I was utterly convinced were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She wanted to get married there in that same magical place, and with an almost manic energy she planned the entire thing. It was an extravagant, breathtakingly beautiful 3-day affair that cost me over $380,000. I did not even blink at the expense. It was a small price to pay for a lifetime of happiness. A week before the wedding, as our respective lawyers were coordinating the final details, my longtime business attorney, a shrewd, cautious man named Arthur who had been with me since the very beginning, urged me in the strongest possible terms to insist on a comprehensive ironclad prenuptial agreement. I brought it up with Lena as gently and as diplomatically as I could, framing it as a mere formality, a standard procedure for someone in my financial position. Her reaction was immediate, theatrical, and devastating. The tears that streamed down her perfect face were not of joy this time. She accused me of not trusting her, of putting a cynical price tag on her love. She asked me how I could possibly stand beside her at the altar, vowing to love and honor her after treating her like a hostile corporate takeover. Her performance was so convincing, so heartbreaking, that it left me reeling. I found myself torn between the cold, hard logic that had made me millions and the desperate, deeply human need to be loved unconditionally. In the end, my heart, a foolish and hopelessly romantic organ, won the battle. I capitulated. I agreed to a compromise, a document that she and her lawyer had drafted, which she presented as the ultimate proof of her pure, untainted intentions. It was a sunset clause prenup. The terms were simple. If we divorced before our 3rd anniversary, she would be entitled to a modest, one-time lump sum payment. But if our marriage endured past the 3-year mark, the prenup would effectively dissolve, and she would be legally entitled to 30% of all assets gained during the marriage. It seemed on the surface entirely fair. I was in love, or perhaps I was just an idiot. Most likely I was both. The first 2 years of our marriage were an idyllic dream, a sun-drenched fantasy brought to life. She was the perfect wife, an incredible hostess who charmed my business associates, and a deeply supportive partner who listened patiently to my work-related anxieties. My life, which had once been a sterile, monochromatic existence of boardrooms, spreadsheets, and endless lines of code, was now filled with vibrant color, with spontaneous laughter, and with a profound sense of peace. I truly felt like I had finally cracked the code to happiness. Then, about 2.5 years into our perfect marriage, the dream began to fray at the edges, slowly and almost imperceptibly at first. A strange, inexplicable coldness started to creep into the warm spaces of our home. Lena became distant, her phone, once a casual accessory, now permanently attached to her hand and always angled away from my line of sight. She acquired a new personal trainer, a handsome, overly familiar man named Marco with suspiciously white teeth and a wandering gaze. She began spending more and more time at the gym, which was followed by long late-night yoga sessions that often, with increasing frequency, ended with her staying over at a friend's house because she was simply too exhausted to make the drive back from the city. The excuses were always plausible, delivered with a casual, almost bored air, but their frequency and her growing emotional distance were setting off alarm bells. My gut, the same primal instinct that had guided me through treacherous business deals and told me which startups to invest in, was now screaming at me, a constant, high-pitched wail that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. I was being consumed by a quiet, gnawing dread that settled in my stomach like a cold stone. I tried to fix it. That is what I do. I am a builder, a problem solver. I foolishly believed that if I just applied more effort, more love, more grand gestures, I could patch the cracks that were beginning to show in our marriage. I planned a surprise trip to a 5-star eco resort in Big Sur, a place steeped in the memory of our happy, carefree early days. She agreed to go, but she was emotionally absent for the entire trip, her attention consumed by the glowing screen of her phone, a tight, annoyed smile plastered on her face whenever I tried to engage her in conversation. I bought her a breathtaking diamond necklace, a piece worth more than most people's cars, hoping the extravagant gift might somehow bridge the chasm that was opening between us. She thanked me with a quick, passionless peck on the cheek before putting it away in her jewelry box, where, to my knowledge, it remained unworn. One evening, I made a desperate, last-ditch attempt to have a real, honest conversation. I sat her down in our cavernous living room, the vast, dark expanse of the Pacific Ocean a moody and dramatic backdrop, and I poured my heart out. I told her that I felt a growing distance between us, that I was scared of losing her, that I would do anything, absolutely anything, to make things right again. She listened to my heartfelt, trembling confession with a patient, almost clinical look on her face. When I was finally done, my raw vulnerability hanging in the air between us, she sighed, a long, drawn-out sound of pure exasperation. She told me I was being insecure. She told me I was being controlling. She said that my neediness was suffocating her and that my immense wealth had clearly made me paranoid. She expertly and cruelly twisted my genuine concern for our marriage into a personal character flaw, skillfully painting me as the villain of our story. I went to bed that night feeling a confusing and toxic mixture of shame and self-doubt, wondering if she was right. Maybe I was the problem, maybe I was broken. The final, brutal awakening, the moment that shattered my delusion completely, came a week later. I came home early from a meeting that had ended ahead of schedule. As I walked silently down the hallway, I overheard her talking on the phone in our massive walk-in closet, her voice low, conspiratorial, and dripping with a mocking amusement that made my skin crawl. "I know he's trying so hard it's almost pathetic," she was saying, followed by a light, tinkling laugh that sounded utterly alien to me. "He just planned this whole big romantic trip. I almost feel bad for him. But it is fine, I just have to hold on a little longer. Only 7 more months to go. Then we can be together and we will never have to worry about money again." A cold, surgical clarity washed over me, a feeling so sharp and so painful that it literally took my breath away. It was all a lie, the love, the marriage, her entire personality. It was a long, meticulously planned and flawlessly executed con, and I was the mark. The heartbreak was immense, a physical weight in my chest that made it difficult to breathe. But as the long, dark hours of that night passed, it began to change, to morph, to crystallize into something else entirely. It became something cold, hard, and absolutely resolute. The loving, foolish husband was gone, dead and buried. In his place stood the entrepreneur, the cold-blooded strategist who had outmaneuvered corporate giants and built an empire from nothing. She had made the fatal, catastrophic mistake of thinking the man she had married was the same naive, love-struck man she was now trying to rob. I did not confront her. I did not yell or scream or give her the satisfaction of a dramatic, emotional scene. I went downstairs to my office, poured myself a very large glass of whiskey, and began to architect her absolute and total ruin. The next morning I made 2 phone calls that would seal her fate. The first was to Arthur, my lawyer. I told him to be ready, that a storm was coming. The second was to a private investigator, a man whose name was whispered with a kind of awe in certain circles. He was the best and most discreet operative in the business, a former intelligence agent whose daily rate was astronomical and worth every single penny. I told him I wanted everything. I wanted high-resolution photos, I wanted crystal-clear video, I wanted audio recordings, I wanted financial trails. I wanted a file so thick, so comprehensive, and so undeniably damning that no court in the country would ever dare to question it. While the investigator and his team got to work, I began my own parallel performance. I became the perfect husband she thought I was all along, a loving, supportive, and slightly dumb rich guy. I apologized profusely for being so needy and insecure. I encouraged her to spend more time with her friends, to go to her yoga classes, to do whatever she needed to do to feel happy and fulfilled. I wanted her to feel safe, secure, and completely, blissfully confident that her brilliant plan was working perfectly. I wanted her to be basking in the warm, triumphant glow of her impending victory when the axe finally fell. At the same time, I initiated the second, more complex phase of my revenge. I convened a meeting with my entire financial team. Over the next few weeks, we executed a series of intricate but completely legal financial transactions. The vast majority of my wealth, the $48 million, was already securely tied up in a complex series of irrevocable trusts, offshore accounts, and a dizzying web of limited liability companies registered in business-friendly states like Delaware and Nevada. We tightened the screws, reinforcing the legal firewalls, ensuring that my personal, on-paper wealth was almost non-existent. My official salary from my own company, the one I paid myself, was a modest $110,000 a year. The Malibu beach house, I discovered with a jolt of alarm, was a major asset held directly in my personal name. We immediately refinanced it, transferring the ownership to one of my corporate entities, legally reclassifying it as a business asset used for corporate retreats and client entertainment. On paper, I was now a man who made a decent living but was by no means fabulously wealthy. I had become a financial ghost, a phantom of my former net worth. My third tactic was more subtle, more psychological. The investigators' initial reports came back quickly, confirming the sordid affair with Marco in lurid, depressing detail. They met at a cheap, seedy hotel near the Los Angeles International Airport twice a week like clockwork. But I wanted more than just simple proof of the affair. I wanted to utterly decimate her character, to expose her as a co-conspirator in a deliberate plot. I knew a man like Marco, a preening, self-obsessed narcissist, would have an ego as fragile as it was massive. I instructed one of my assistants to create an anonymous profile on a popular fitness app. She left a glowing, 5-star review for him, calling him a life-changing trainer to Los Angeles elite. I knew he would not be able to resist the bait. Sure enough, the investigator's next report included a collection of screenshots of Marco's texts to his friends. He was boasting in crude and explicit terms about how he had bagged a tech millionaire's wife, and how she was going to leave her husband for him and set them both up for life. He was, in his infinite stupidity, creating a documented record of their conspiracy for me free of charge. The final month was an exercise in pure, unadulterated torture. I had to live with her, to sleep next to her, to smile and pretend to love her, all while knowing the depth of her betrayal. I watched her surreptitiously mark the days off a small calendar she kept hidden in her underwear drawer, a countdown to her payday, to the 3-year anniversary that would unlock her fortune. She had absolutely no idea that she was actually counting down the seconds to her own spectacular destruction. Exactly 1 month before the prenup sunset clause was set to activate, I received the final, comprehensive report from the investigator. It was a true masterpiece of modern espionage, a thick, heavy binder filled with irrefutable proof of her adultery, her lies, and her calculated conspiracy to defraud me. I called Arthur and gave him the order: file the papers. The next evening, Lena came home from her final yoga session, humming a cheerful tune to herself, looking radiant and triumphant. A man in a crisp, dark suit was waiting for her in our living room. He served her with the divorce papers. I watched her face as she read them, a rapid, fascinating progression of emotions playing out across her features. First utter confusion, then stunned shock, which quickly curdled into pure, unadulterated fury. "You cannot do this," she screamed at me, her voice shrill and ugly. "We are a month away, a single month." I did not say a word. I simply walked over to my leather briefcase, which I had placed on a nearby chair, and retrieved a copy of the investigator's final report. I placed the thick binder on the expensive marble coffee table in front of her with a quiet, definitive thud. She opened it. I watched, with a strange sense of detachment, as the color drained from her face, her confident, righteous rage melting away into a primal, animalistic fear. She saw the high-resolution photos of her and Marco in their cheap hotel room. She saw the damning transcripts of her phone calls where she plotted her future. She saw the screenshots of Marco's idiotic, bragging texts. She slammed the binder shut, her hands trembling, and looked up at me, her eyes wide with a desperate, frantic panic. The anger was gone, completely replaced by a frantic, pathetic attempt to salvage the situation. She begged, she cried, she offered to work on things, to go to therapy, to fire Marco, to do anything. She tried to resurrect the charming, loving woman I had first met, but it was a hollow, transparent performance. I could see the cold, calculating gears turning frantically behind her eyes as she searched for a new angle, a new strategy. I just looked at her, my expression a complete and total blank, and said 2 words. "It is over, Lena, get your things." The fallout was swift, brutal, and deeply satisfying. Because I had filed for divorce citing adultery, and because I had an overwhelming mountain of proof that it had occurred well before the 3-year mark, the fidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement was triggered. She was entitled to absolutely nothing. Her legal team tried to contest it, of course, but the evidence was so absolute, so crushing, that the judge dismissed their motions almost immediately. They tried to argue that my assets were being hidden, but my complex financial structure was legally ironclad and had been in place for years, long before I had even met her. She tried to go to the media to paint me as a cruel, vindictive monster, but she had signed a comprehensive and unforgiving non-disclosure agreement as part of the prenup, making it illegal for her to profit from or even speak publicly about any aspect of our relationship. Every single door she tried to open was slammed shut in her face. Marco, upon realizing there would be no multi-million-dollar payday, vanished from her life instantly. The last I heard, she was renting a small, dingy one-bedroom apartment in Glendale and working part-time at the front desk of a yoga studio. As for me, I sold the Malibu house and bought a new one on a quiet, secluded beach in Maui. The funny thing is, the revenge, as complete as it was not the end of the story. The real twist was what happened next inside of me. About a year after the divorce was finalized, I received a phone call from an old mutual acquaintance. They told me that Lena was in a truly desperate situation, struggling to pay her rent, and was asking through them if I could find it in my heart to help her, just a little bit, to get back on her feet. In that moment, as I listened to the request, I felt nothing. No lingering anger, no satisfying schadenfreude, no flicker of pity. Just a profound, quiet sense of indifference. I politely declined and hung up the phone, and that is when I realized the true nature of my revenge. It was not really about destroying Lena, it was about destroying the weak, needy, and foolish man I had allowed myself to become with her. The man who was so desperate for love that he was willing to trade his own sound judgment for a hollow, beautiful illusion. I recently started dating again, a barista I met at a small, local coffee shop who had no idea who I was and did not seem to care when she found out. She makes me laugh, a real, genuine laugh that comes from deep in my belly. My net worth is just a number again, not a definition. For the first time in a very long time, I feel truly rich. And that is when I learned some betrayals can never be forgiven, not because you are incapable of letting them go, but because they force you to become someone entirely new, someone who no longer has anything left to forgive.